are we on? We're streaming? Good evening, everyone. Nyama, Wanjare Woyangulin, Guinganyinu Bik Weno Dawabandawi, Nyawiana Nyanga Bik Ban Ba Nyagu, Gagukal Nangit Bambuth Yellingbu Ba Gamaji. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people on whose land Darebin Council stands. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you all for coming tonight. We'll start moving through our agenda as per usual. So membership of this meeting is as listed in the agenda. There are no apologies. That takes us to item number 3, disclosures of conflict of interest. Councillors, are there any conflicts to declare? There being none, we'll move on. So before we move into question and submission time, I would like to take this opportunity to outline my expectations in regards to behaviour and remind councillors of our obligations under the Code of Conduct. At Darebin, we pride ourselves on being a progressive and contemporary council. In the interest of demonstrating exemplary leadership, I have high expectations that we will all be professional in our conduct throughout the evening and respectful in our debate. It is important for both councillors and the community to remember that our council chamber is both a workplace and a public space, and we have an obligation to ensure that the working environment and public forums are safe for everyone, both emotionally as well as physically. I want to be clear that I won't tolerate any form of personal acrimony or insult, grandstanding or yelling, nor will I put up with talking over the top of one another, any use of unreasonable or impolite language or interjections from the gallery. We have a lot to get through, and as always, I will expect people to direct questions to myself as the chair, and I'll endeavour to make sure everybody has an opportunity to participate, but also stick to time. Moving to question time, I'll start with questions submitted online, but before I do, I would like to remind people in the gallery, if you come up, to state your name and postcode at the lectern. If you can't approach the lectern, an officer will bring a microphone to you, and please address your questions to me as the Mayor. There is no need for lengthy preambles in the questions, so please just give the question without a lengthy preamble. So beginning with questions received online, the first 2 questions are from Mr. Brian Sanigan. Mr. Sanigan did provide these questions with a lengthy preamble, which I don't propose to read out. I'll move straight to his questions. The first question, is Council aware that AIG Security is currently under investigation by Victoria Police for alleged fraud? And in brackets he's written, I refer to the article, hundreds of security guards banned over alleged accreditation fraud in The Age on the 26th of June 2019. And the response, Council security contract is with Advent Security and XYZ Security, which are sister companies. The second question from Mr. Sanigan, was the decision to issue me a banning order sent on the November the 27th taken by a full meeting of Council, or was it a unilateral decision of the CEO, Ms. Sue Wilkinson? And the response, the CEO made this decision in line with her health and occupational safety responsibilities to ensure that all staff and councillors are provided with a safe working environment. The next questions received are from Ms. Lisa Oakley. Is Ms. Oakley here? Not being here, I will read out those questions. I attended the public information session at Council regarding the development of Oakover-Kenwood Railway Parade on the 31st of July. I would consider Council a major stakeholder in this project. Why was there no Council representation at this information session? And the answer. I understand that the session you are referring to was run by the Department of Health and Human Services, so they could speak to the community about their project. Although the session was held at a council site, we wouldn't normally expect to attend this kind of session as council needs to make an independent planning decision. Council will be responsible for assessing the development plan application when it is submitted. We'll do this as we would do with any application against the objectives and requirements in the planning scheme. And Ms. Oakley's second question is, in regards to the plans presented for the above site, why has the design and built form guides within the DPO 11 been ignored? Building heights along Oakover Road exceed the maximum preferred building height of 6 storeys. There also appears to be no articulation or recessing of built form on plans creating a 6 to 8 storey wall along Oakover Road? And the answer: thank you for sharing your concerns. I can confirm that a development plan application has not yet been formally submitted to Council, so we haven't yet considered whether the plan meets the requirements of the DPO, the Development Plan Overlay. We will do this after a development plan application is received. I would encourage you to also raise your views with the Department of Health and Human Services directly. Those are the only questions that have been submitted online, so I would like to invite questions from members of the gallery. Please raise your hand if you have a question. Mr Nugent.
Thank you. John Nugent, 3076. Mayor Rennie, my question is about parking at the Preston Market in September. Mayor Rennie, I have received a reply. I know that the Preston Market is a private car park. That is not causing the problem. The problem is the council is leasing the City Oval out during September to the NFNL all day. Mayor Rennie, ward councils are aware of this problem. When will this council look after the shopkeepers at Preston?
Thank you, Mr Nugent, for that question. As it wasn't received prior to the meeting, I will take it on notice and we will provide you with an answer.
That's fine. Mayor Rennie, my question also comes from the 22nd of July. My question is about the answer provided by Council to my question on the 22nd of the 7th, 19, re-consultant fees in the 1920 budget. Mayor Rennie, Council provided an amount of $4.687 million in this budget. Could Council provide a breakup of this $4.687 million and provide which department received what amounts, including the CEO's department? And there was a question I did ask on the 24th of June. I haven't received a reply. I'll give you another copy of this letter, Mayor Rennie. Is that okay?
Thank you. A copy of any question. It was my understanding that we had responded to all your questions, and I do have...
Except the 24th.
The 24th. Okay.
So
if you could leave a copy, that would be good. In relation to your question about a further breakdown of the budget, I would have to refer that to council officers and will do so. Thank you. Are there further questions from members of the gallery? No, there being none, we'll continue with the agenda, but I do note that I overlooked item 4 on the agenda, which is the confirmation of minutes of the council meetings. I'll take that as moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Greco. All those in favour? And against?
No, I'm just trying to notify you of the conflict of interest.
Okay. Thank you. So noted. We'll note that you abstained. I apologise, Councillor Lawrence. I had asked for conflicts at the beginning, but I think you might have been out. So. Okay. Apologies that you didn't have time to do that. We will. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Rennie, sorry, before we go on, I was out of the room when you asked the councillors whether they had a conflict, and I do. Can I address that now?
Yes, you may.
So I have a conflict to item 14.1, the recycling contract, and that is an indirect conflict due to a conflicting duty.
Thank you, Councillor Surf. So noted. We will hear that again at the beginning of that item. So we'll move now to petitions. Councillors, are there any petitions that people wish to table? Councillor Lawrence, I'm happy to go to you first, but would note that it's customary to raise a hand rather than stand, so I'll ask if you have something to move or note that you raise your hand. So, Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I have a petition from 150 people.
Councillor Lawrence, can I just get you to turn your microphone on?
I have a petition from 130 people regarding Donath and Dole reserves.
Yes, thank you. And I'll just ask if someone could... Actually, I might get you to read the petition so we know what it is.
The petition says, to the Mayor and Councillors of Darebin City Council, we the undersigned users of JC Donath and IW Dole Reserves give John Nugent authority to advocate on our behalf as regards proposed planned improvements and works to the above reserves.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. And can I just check that you would want to raise the motion that we note and refer that to the CEO for consideration and response?
Yes.
Okay, so noted. Is there someone who would second that motion? Councillor Greco, thank you. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Further petitions, Councillor Lasserve.
I have received a petition that I would like to table. There is a lot of introductory preamble remarks, but the petition is that I support the removal of the implemented parking permit zone on Collins Street, Thornbury, between Thornbury High School and Jones Street. I support the assessment mentioned in this letter and move to support an open discussion between all relevant parties to find a better solution to this known issue. This petition was signed by 15 residents. I'd like to move a motion that the petition be referred to the CEO for consideration and response.
So moved, thank you, and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you. Are there any further petitions? No, there being none, we will continue and go to urgent business. Councillor Williams?
I have an urgent business item.
Okay, thank you. If you could tell this meeting what... So we'll get it up on the screen.
That council urgently engage with Preston Market to assist them to have proper signage and a defibrillator after a tragic incident that occurred on Saturday. I believe this is an urgent...
Okay, yep. You just want to say why it's urgent?
Yep. I believe that this is urgent due to safety, due to community safety.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Is there someone who would like to move that we accept that as urgent?
Is that correct, the title?
No, it's not. So I don't know how we've got the wrong title. Thank you for that pick-up, Councillor Lyons. A significant departure from what was intended.
Can I also ask, Mayor, it says defibrillated rather than...
It should be defibrillator.
We will fix that.
So we'll fix, we won't... So we need to accept this item. Is there someone who wishes to move a motion that we accept the item as urgent business? Oh, you moved that and seconded by Councillor Williams? Okay, so this is in terms of accepting it onto the agenda. All those in favour? And against? Thank you, that motion is carried. We'll now ask, obviously we have a mover for this motion. Is there a seconder for the motion?
No, for the purposes.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Moved by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Over to you, Councillor Williams.
Yes, it's come to my attention with the community that there had been an incident that had happened on Saturday which created a bit of confusion for those who needed a defibrillator, and it was confusing that they didn't know where they could obtain one, and apparently there was none at the market at the time, and one of the people from the community actually had to go over to Woolworths to try and obtain one there. So considering that there were no tradespeople that actually had been trained in this particular area, and there was no nurses and no doctors, it actually created a bit of confusion on the day.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor McCarthy.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, are there any further speakers? There being none, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. Is there any further urgent business? No. Councillor Lawrence?
Mayor Rennie, I had a couple of items regarding the detention centre at 120 Camp Road, Broadmeadows.
Thank you. It's my understanding you've been provided with advice that those matters are not urgent. I'll just ask the CEO to confirm that. Yes, so advice has been provided that those cannot be considered as urgent business items under the local law. So we'll move on.
Just a point of order, Mayor Rennie. Just in terms of our governance rules, if something is considered to be not urgent by the officers, is it the call of the council to consider that and make a determination on that?
Okay, so council could move by resolution if someone would like to move a resolution. Okay, so if we could get the motion up on the screen, because in order for councillors to vote, they would have to see the motion. So we'll put the motion on the screen. It'll be visible to people on the who are reading on the internet.
Mayor Rennie, I'd move that this motion regarding writing to the State Minister Luke Donellan to urge him to use his documented powers for the protection of children in Victoria to intervene in the matter of children being held at 120 Camp Road, Broadmeadows in detention by the federal government be considered as an item of business tonight.
So moved. Is there a seconder? Okay, seconded by Councillor Amir. I'll just note before we proceed, is this procedural? Before we move into debate, I would remind people of the local law which says council must only admit business as urgent if it A, cannot safely or conveniently be deferred until the next ordinary meeting, or involves a matter of urgency as determined by the CEO. So that's... Okay, so Councillor Williams seconded that. So Councillor Lawrence, we're speaking to the motion to accept it onto the agenda.
Yes. Madam Mayor, I'd urge council...
Sorry, Mayor Rennie, just a reminder.
Mayor Rennie. Old habits. Mayor Rennie, I'd urge councillors to consider this as a matter as an urgent item. Obviously, we are a council on record for the climate emergency across the world, but we're also a council embedded in human rights and ethos of welcoming refugees to our community. I was absolutely shocked when invited by the Teachers for Refugees to attend 120 Camp Road, Broadmeadows, where children are incarcerated, very young children, and there is also one who's turned 17 and now has no access to education inside that place. As a council that's promoting early childhood development, and in particular 3-year-old kindergarten, we understand the developmental needs to actually get on with socialisation and early child access to education and kindergartens. These younger kids being held by the federal government are getting no such access and are getting no such services, and could really be easily accommodated within the community and present no danger. So I was delighted by the grandmothers there supporting refugee children across Australia, and also the Tamil Refugee Council was there, but the teachers were quite amazing in their determination to reach out. They know all the children across Australia who are detained by name.
Sorry, Councillor Lawrence, I'll remind you that you're debating the motion as to whether we accept it onto the agenda, not the merits of the motion itself.
I'm trying to highlight that this council's strategic policies actually reflect welcoming refugees, and this issue is critical because the welfare of young people is in danger who are incarcerated in detention. And this is definitely a core business of council to provide for
I'm
the
just
welfare.
reminding you, none of us doubt this is core business. You're debating whether it's
I'm
urgent and
debating
should
it
be
whether
accepted.
it's an urgent item that needs to be debated, and I'd appreciate if you didn't interject. I've been wasting my time dealing with an invalid point of order. It is absolutely critical to this motion for all councillors to understand the harm posed to the welfare of these children who are in eyesight of the border of Monies Road of this city. And it is absolutely important that this council considers matters of urgency in relation to our stated values and policies.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
This is an urgent matter. It is under our health and wellbeing charter, and it's under our community safety, considering it's in Broadmeadows, which is only around the corner from here. What happens if one of those children actually dies in the detention between now, as in tonight's council meeting, and our next ordinary council meeting? I don't think it's a guilt that I'd like to have on my head.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers? Councillor O'Meara.
The fact that children are being held in detention is absolutely abhorrent and fills me with rage. These children have been in detention for at least a decade. This is something that has been ongoing for a long time. I have friends who have volunteered at this site 10, 15 years ago, teaching them music, teaching them skills. This is absolutely an ongoing matter, and there's no reason why this couldn't have been put forward as a notice of motion within the timeframes. The reality is that none of the 9 of us did that. So I guess the urgency is on all of us for not meeting the requirements under the Local Government Act, and it's not reasonable for us to disregard the clear direction of our local governance laws because of that oversight by the 9 of us for not addressing this earlier.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. I'm seeking further speakers.
Question.
You may ask a question.
Mayor Rennie, I just have a question because my understanding is that this is not relating to the Local Government Act, it's relating to our local laws.
Our local law.
Just to clarify that.
Yep. Further speakers?
Well, actually, it's just a question, Mayor. I'm still not clear on what's happened since we last had a motion in relation to children in detention at this site and what the particular new powers or change in powers or whatever it may be that relates to Minister Donnellan. So if someone could enlighten me, please. I'm not clear on why this is urgent, given that it is always urgent and we have a standing position advocating for this anyway.
So you've entered into debate. Thank you. I've understood the question. We have received advice that this is not urgent. So in answer to your question, I'll just refer back to that advice. Councillor Lawrence will have a right of reply and he might pick that up in his right of reply. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you. I'm happy to consider this to be...
Councillor Greco, can you just check that your microphone's on?
Sorry, that's better? Yeah, look.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Look, I'm happy for this motion to be considered as an urgent motion. And I believe that it's our duty to ensure that we deal with these matters as quickly as possible. We know that the children there at the centre are in dire straits, notwithstanding that they've been there, as Councillor O'Meara said, for 10 years or more. But their situation is always of an urgent nature. So as a result of that, given that their situation is what it is, I think that we owe it to consider this motion as an urgent motion and not to be too taken up by our procedural processes of whether it fits the definition of urgent or does not fit the definition of urgent. I think that the matter speaks for itself, and we as a council should act accordingly. And finally, I would say that given that the council now meets every 3 weeks, there are situations like this that do arise, and I think that it's incumbent on us to deal with them, even as urgent motions, and so that we could also demonstrate to the federal government, if the motion is eventually passed, that we deal with these issues not as an ordinary course of our work, but also we deal with these issues because we also consider them to be of an urgent nature.
Thank you, Councillor Gueco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Just briefly, I've heard the discussion so far, and there's nothing that has indicated to me that this isn't something that couldn't be put forward as a notice of motion at the next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Any further speakers? Councillor Lawrence, you have a right of reply.
Mayor Rennie, there's a couple of statements made that I do need to correct. There are some children there that are younger, much younger than 10 years old, so their impression might have been created by some of the debate that they are 10-year-olds there. I did mention a 17-year-old because that's become critical because they're no longer getting access to education. In regards to the younger children in 3 and 4 years old, the situation is very urgent. It requires some people to raise their voice because there are dental problems that have emerged there. And I think there was other counsellors there at the time, I'm not sure from Moreland, and we heard from the teachers for refugees on that day who quoted some information which I wasn't aware of, that was in fact that under Victorian state law, there are powers resting with Minister Luke Donnellan that would allow intervention for the welfare of these children. And I think that it is really the moral issue of our time that we are not locking up indefinitely children and depriving them of basic human services that we take for granted just a few hundred metres away in the city of Darebin.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of the debate. So we're now voting on whether to accept this as urgent business. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. So we'll now debate the motion. So we'll keep it on there. So, Councillor Lawrence, I take it that you've moved this motion.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I move this motion.
Seconded by Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Rennie, yes, I was very delighted and proud to go and meet after an invitation from Teachers for Refugees and the Tamil Refugee Council and go to 120 Camp Road, Broadmeadows. And I had been made aware a bit about this place by the former Mayor of Preston, Gary Youngworth, who just passed away after a long battle with cancer. And in his later years, he had been making a habit of reaching out and befriending refugees. And the Teachers for Refugees and the Grandmothers for Refugees who were there have also done that. Now, we have a false statement that comes from the minister, a federal minister, that there are no children in detention. They were actually able to play hooked up Skype communication from the other children that are suffering from dental disease in Queensland and also communicate with the ones inside Camp Road. I was absolutely shocked that just in eyesight of Monies Road, of eyesight of Latrobe Ward, where we celebrate migrants, we are still, in this day and age, incarcerating children. It really deeply shocked me, and I thought, I'm looking there on that hill, I can see the city of Whittlesea, I can see the city of Hume, I can see the city of Moreland, I can see the city of Darebin. the heart of multiculturalism in Melbourne. And I think that as a council, we should directly confront the federal government on this atrocity, and the powers exist at the state level for a minister to intervene, just as we would expect all agencies to intervene on the welfare of all children that are within the boundaries of those 4 councils. So I'm moving this motion to start things rolling, but I would hope that our other northern councils would also join in.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
Look, we have many children that are held in detention centres, and I won't even go into the disgrace of what they have to go through. Considering a lot of these children are children, that means they are under the age of 18. Does that mean? Sorry. And I think it's important that, as my fellow councillors already pointed out, we need to be more vocal about this. We need to take more action. We need to get more councils on board. We need to be a voice for those who don't have a voice. And these are the children who are in the detention centre. So we need to try and help them as much as possible, especially to try and get as much attention to the media and to ensure that they are safe and they are kept out of these premises, because it's heartbreaking to see that.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I was a bit intrigued as to why this was considered an urgent item, and I think Councillor Lawrence shed some light on that in terms of having a revelation that the Minister for Child Protection, being Lieutenant Allen, may have some ability to intervene in this space, and on that basis, I was happy to proceed on that basis. Having heard the debate, I'm happy to support the substantive motion, and I do that on the basis that I acknowledge that we have a very long-standing position advocating against the detention of both children and also, obviously, the involvement of people who are asylum seekers in our community rather than behind bars. They are not criminals, they are human beings, and they deserve to be treated as such. I am genuinely interested in what response we might receive to such a request, given that I can't believe we've had a great response so far from state authorities in relation to seeking to intervene in this space. If there is a state power, as is alluded to in Councillor Lawrence's motion there, then I'd be intrigued to know what it is. And Councillor Lawrence has obviously done a bit of work there, and I have to move on faith that work actually would result in something. I probably would make another point, though, which is that I don't want us to get into a habit in this chamber of picking issues and throwing sort of urgent motions in because we've had a moment. We actually need to be strategic and smart about how we do our advocacy, and we do a lot of advocacy out of this chamber. So I'm prepared to support it because it's quite directed. I'm intrigued to see where it goes, but I would urge councillors to think a little bit more strategically about the advocacy that we do through this chamber in future.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Look, I also have an amendment that I'd like to put. I'll read it out and then hand it over to the officers to put it up on the board. That as a second point, and I hope it's acceptable to the mover and the seconder, the council write to adjacent councils urging them to support this initiative by also writing to the Minister Donnellan. So that's the amendment.
I'm very happy to accept that.
Is that acceptable to you, Councillor Williams?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, acceptable.
Okay, so
Just very quickly, look, I support the statements that have been made, and I won't go over them again. Just to point out that, as Councillor McCarthy has said, that this council has a long tradition and has taken a very strong stance in relation to migrant and refugee issues over the years, and we continue to do so. Notwithstanding that we need to be strategic, I believe that we have been strategic and we are being strategic, but the fact that we're putting this motion and the fact that we're putting this motion as an urgent motion in itself demonstrates the urgency of the situation. And I believe that if we can get on board other councils, as mentioned by Councillor Lawrence, given that this northern part of of the Melbourne metropolitan area is the heart of multicultural Melbourne, and I think that it's important to get those other councils on board to support such an initiative. Also, we know that those other councils have also got a very good, strong track record in regards to supporting initiatives in support of migrant and refugees and people that have been detained by as a result of Australian law in relation to how they treat refugees. So hopefully councils will support this motion and also support the additional amendment that I've put forward, that we can also get other councils involved in this project.
Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? There being none, we'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried, and we'll note that that was unanimous. So that brings us to item 8, consideration. Councillor Lyons?
Mayor Rennie, I believe there's another urgency motion I have there.
Okay, we'll go to that. So we'll ask if Councillor Lawrence had another motion that was not assessed as being urgent, so we'll put that on the screen so that can be considered. So Councillor Lawrence, you would like to move a motion that be accepted onto the agenda as urgent? Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, yes, I'd like to move that this be accepted as an urgent item as well.
Okay, so I'll seek a seconder for that motion.
I'm happy to second it.
That's seconded by Councillor Greco. So Councillor Lawrence, to you.
Madam Mayor, this...
Sorry, Mayor Rennie.
Mayor Rennie, this item again focuses on 5 individuals that are in Camp Road, Broadmeadows, but in this case are adults, and relates to a situation similar to Manus Island, where people have been indefinitely incarcerated for 6 years, and most famously someone has been awarded a literary award while he's been sitting there. But this relates to some incarceration that occurred under ASIO reports 10 years ago. So it's coming up to 10 years. And why I would submit this as urgent is that at that stage, I've noted with my interactions and following the indefinite incarceration of different people seeking refuge, is that you do get to points of issues of suicide and self-harm. And after 10 years, I think my sense was there was almost fading hope there.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Greco.
Mayor Rennie, look, again, I'm happy to support this motion as an urgent motion. I think that given that we've already supported the previous motion, which is very much in the same spirit, and I think for the sake of consistency and also for the very merits of the substantive issues that are in relation to what's raised via this motion, I think we should consider this as an urgent motion.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? There being none, we'll put that to the vote. So we're voting on whether to accept this as urgent. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. So the item has been accepted onto the agenda. Councillor Lawrence will take it as moved by yourself. Is there a seconder? Councillor Williams? Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I don't want to take up too much time. This is the same issue that this council is on the record of opposing time and time again in regards to indefinite detention. It has the added ingredient of people incarcerated after a civil war where there was 2 sides claiming homelands, and secret reports and security reports that we don't know about and we're not shown because of having some of the most thorough security laws in the Western world these days. So I take the point made by Councillor McCarthy about the need for strategic direction on this, but I felt compelled to still bring this as an urgent item, given the submissions and that were put there by the spokesperson for the Victorian Tamil Refugee Association around the need for some kind of oversight about what was the initial assessments that have led to 10 years of indefinite incarcerations. And there's obviously been there's been some famous people connected to this who passed away and died in detention centres in Australia and in Asia connected to this tragedy of the civil war in Sri Lanka. So I think that we should lend our voice to this as well and remember those people also who are sitting there in 120 Camp Road, Broadmeadows.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
I won't be saying much, but other than criminals actually get less sentences in jail, and here we have innocent people that have been sitting in detention centres for 10 years.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Just very quickly, Mayor Reddy, look, I think the case really speaks for itself in terms of people being in detention for indefinite periods of time. I have some direct experience in relation to the Tamil situation. I visited Sri Lanka on a number of occasions, and on one occasion I was actually an international monitor in their elections. And the situation in Sri Lanka has not changed, irrespective of the cessation of the civil war there. And the Tamil community is persecuted, continues to be persecuted, particularly by the military, and particularly in the Jaffna area, in the northern part and the eastern part of Sri Lanka. So it doesn't surprise me that that these people are still hanging in limbo, where the Australian government refuses to make a decision on their case because their case is so obvious, and that the Australian government does not want to embarrass the Sri Lankan government in relation to their so-called peaceful times that they're going through at the moment. So I commend the motion and fully support that the council take this action.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor McCarthy.
Mayor, look, for the purposes of not taking up too much time, I just would state very clearly, Council has a very strong and long-standing position, and Councillor Greco will recall the advocacy that we've done over many years in this space in terms of arguing against indefinite detention and the sorts of abhorrent policies that other councillors have referred to here already. I would make the point again, though, and I just want to repeat this because I don't want this to become a pattern in this chamber. We get to go and visit and engage with a whole range of causes and issues, and it's really important that we do something with that, and I commend Councillor Lawrence in acting on the visit that he undertook to that site, and having been there myself, I can appreciate how moving and effective it is to see people stuck in a facility which is effectively a jail for, in this case, over a decade. So I can appreciate the sentiment, but I do think we need to be really careful about making sure that we actually get some more work into these sorts of resolutions so that they are well targeted and have the outcome we desire. I have no faith whatsoever that we are going to receive a positive response by the Federal Minister, and I have very little faith that we will receive a positive response from the Shadow Minister, because as is the case, we actually have unfortunately, in terms of the major parties of government at the federal level, a bit of collegiality on this issue, which is unfortunate, and hopefully that'll change in the future. So I appreciate the sentiment, but I think we need to be really careful about the patterns that we set, and I commend Councillor Lawrence for feeling passionate about this issue, and that's great. But we need to be really smart and tactical so we get an outcome, not just raise a voice. We can raise a voice all the time, we do it all the time. Sometimes we do it and we actually don't get heard well because we do it
10 seconds.
And in the wrong ways.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously.
Mary, could we have that noted?
We will note that that was unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. That brings us to item 8, consideration of reports. Yes, 8.1.
No, I have a question, Mayor Rennie's pardon me.
Yes, what's your question, Councillor Messina?
Sorry, apologies for being late. Can I have some clarification regarding urgent motions? Because I did put forth a motion to the CEO, acting CEO, and it was not regarded as urgent, yet not taking away or withdrawing for the urgency of that.
I understand your question. Those motions put tonight were also not considered urgent by the CEO. This council resolved to vote for them despite what the local law says and the advice. So,
Can I just point of order through you, the chair? Councillor Messina should be invited to put her motion, if she wants to, as an urgent motion, for council to consider it, whether to accept it as an urgent motion.
Well, I wish I was given that information previously, but I had not been given that information. Can I please defer my urgent motion to the end of the meeting, if that's acceptable to the mayor?
Any further consideration of that would have to occur via a resolution in this chamber, which could happen if a councillor was willing to put something now or later. Councillors, this is not good practice. Nothing about this is okay.
Look,
Councillor Lasserf. Sorry, sit down, Councillor Lasserf.
I don't want to do this, but I wanted to, in light of what's been happening, could I please move a procedural motion to reorder the business and that we return to urgent business after notices of motion?
Thank you for that motion. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Greco. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. So the agenda will be reordered as noted, and we're now on item 8, 8.1, declaration of the Preston Central Business Precinct Special Rate Scheme. Yep. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Thank you. Councillor Williams.
This is pretty straightforward. It's the declaration of the Preston Central Business Precinct for the special rate scheme for 2019 to 2024. This is what this actually does. It's a proposal for the special rate that we've been doing for the last 20 years, so it's not anything new. And what it actually does is it takes a minimal amount of money, which is less than 1 cent per dollar of the capital improvement value of the property. So the proposals of marketing, what we do with that money, works out to $110,000 annually, and we promote the area and the businesses to attract new visitors and shoppers for the area, improving the centre and branding and social media process. So it's pretty straightforward. If this gets through, then we will obviously write to all their submissions and thanking them. We will write to the owners and to let them know of normal processes, and we'll also print that in the local newspaper. And if anybody also in that consideration, if there's any issues regarding hardship, that we will also look at things like that for the owners. We'll notify all the owners and any other person on submissions, and we'll notify them also. So the special rate will continue right through from 2019 to 2024, and that's pretty much about it.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Williams, and particularly to thank you to both the officers and all the businesses in Preston Central that have been involved in this process. These processes come around, I do recall, when the 2008 levy was put in place, and of course we've seen some good work that's come out of it. I think there's also an aspiration for this sort of work to really be owned by the businesses that operate and to really be driven through their own local strategy. And obviously there's been previous council resolutions that councils would note in the report to move to a Preston Business Association model rather than the Preston Business Advisory Committee, and I think that's a good move. It mirrors and reflects what takes place already in Fairfield and Northcote, where we have also very successful special rate mechanisms in place that have delivered a really strong sense of focus, both in terms of promotion and coordination and programming in those areas. And it would be great to see more of that in Preston, not just obviously in the high street and surrounding streets, but also integrating with the Preston market as well, of which I would note around 15% of the income for this special rate actually comes from Preston market store holders. I just would note something else, councillors, and I think it's worth noting, is that in line with our electronic gaming machine policy, we aren't including Kramers in this special rate, and that's for the very clear reason that this council has taken a very strong policy stance to not take money and to not support the activities of electronic gaming in the city because of the extreme harm that it causes so many in our community. And so from a policy consistency point of view, we have not included Kramers in this. And I think that's a good decision, it's an important decision, and it's a consistent decision in relation to that larger policy setting, of which we have obviously taken
10
through this
seconds.
chamber. So I note that there were a small number of objections, actually considerably less than I would have expected, and on that basis I'm happy to support this rate going forward.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers? Councillor Amir.
I've actually spent the last 2 months deliberating whether or not to support this motion. It is something that I have mixed feelings about. It's a challenging situation in that this is done for the good of the business district. All businesses in the precinct will be making a contribution, and the feedback we've got from some of those businesses is that the value to all businesses is not equal, in that those who are retail businesses get greater benefit, the kind of thing that someone might walk past and go in and buy something, compared to the professional services and arts businesses and so forth. I also acknowledge that there are many member-based organisations in Darebin, and mostly we don't mandate membership. So this is something that I want to continue to have conversations about in terms of our role of council, and also acknowledge that the role of councils in private businesses is a complex issue, and no doubt one of which there's diverse community views. However, that said, I will be supporting in favour of this for 2 reasons. One is that recently we've implemented the new model whereby there'll be an independent Preston Business Association, and I think that with this new model there will hopefully be good outcomes, and the businesses will see the value of that. This is for a fixed term of 5 years, so in the 5 years we can assess the success, both in terms of, I suppose, the material gains and also the feedback from traders to see how this might be able to be improved. And we're not going to be able to get that information unless we test this model out. There is, I feel, a strong social community benefit in having the Preston Central Precinct as a thriving business precinct, in terms of the feel of the community vibe, community connections, and that value goes well beyond the financial gain for individual businesses. Thirdly, it is going to be a changing context within Central Preston in the next 5 years. We've got the level crossing removal, we've got the redevelopment of Preston Market. It's going to be a lot of activity. We're also making new planning changes in that region, hopefully new housing in that region. And I think that's a time when we do need to have a local geographical focus, and have, not just one voice, but a voice among many that is speaking on behalf of the traders to keep business up, to keep supporting the traders through what will be a very exciting, but in some cases challenging context in the next 5 years to come.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Councillor Messina.
Thank you. I just want to echo what my fellow councillors have said. Vibrant economy is stimulated by what our traders are doing. Basically, our traders, what they actually will do is bring a disposable income to the people that work in the particular area. We know the evolution of what's happening in the Preston Central District, not only with the appointment of an officer that is actually going to be looking after the Preston Central District, but also with the evolution of the elevated rail and the Preston Market itself, and also the Darebin Arts and Entertainment Centre. I can't wait to look at what happens with the evolution of this district in the next couple of years, and I think it's going to be the crown jewel. It's not going to be Preston Market, it's going to actually be the Preston Precinct. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Reddy. Look, I support the introduction of a special levy, and I note that there has been support by the traders themselves in introducing this levy. That's how the levy actually gets considered by council. So there is a democratic process in terms of how this levy is established. I think it's important to know why we promote the idea of this levy, and to me, what's essential in relation to these levies is that it's a way of small business supporting themselves and ensuring that small business thrives within our city. We know that small business bring jobs, and we know that small business is the backbone of usually of communities, particularly a community like the city of Darebin. Also, I note that over nearly $120,000 will be raised, and over 5 years, that's almost $600,000. The other thing that also is important to note that businesses already contribute 1.75 rates, 1.75% of the residential rate. So they're already making an additional contribution in terms of the rate receipt that the council gets. So having said that, and also the comments that was made by Councillor Mia in relation to these funds and how they're raised and how they're spent, I think it's important for us into the future to actually consider how council can best match, if you like, the efforts that have been made by small businesses in promoting their areas. So that's something that I would be keen to debate in future council meetings in terms of what council can do to actually help to match the money that traders themselves are putting forward in regards to promoting their particular area. So on that basis, I'm happy to support the introduction of this levy.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Rennie, happy to support this motion, and just want to underscore the importance of marketing locations for retail centres. And we did hear that there's some dissidence about service providers, but the real power of having a location that is advertised for both weekly and daily shopping, and also for special festivals and events, is it does create walk-in business, even for service providers, because you're just increasing the volume and the foot traffic in that location, and the branding that is a place you can go to for a range of services and goods. So it's really important when you look at the marketing budgets of places like Northlands compared to this locally run small business centre. And so really, this is a fairly small amount. It's a modest amount in compared to other retail chains. And I'd echo Councillor Greco's sentiments. Probably we need to leverage this money more as an organisation, especially with social marketing, so that they get more bang for their buck.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. We'll note that that was unanimous. That brings us to item 8.2 on the agenda, the development plan for Plenty Road, Bundoora. Councillor Amir, the motion as per the report has been moved by Councillor Amir. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Lawrence. Thank you. Councillor Amir.
So the motion here is for the amendment of the precinct development plan for the Polaris development in Bundoora. This is a key site on Plenty Road next to La Trobe University. So the main change proposed here is increasing the height of the hotel on Plenty Road, and also be office buildings from 3 stories to 8 to 9 stories, and from 2 stories to 5 to 6 stories respectively. So this is a considerable increase, and it will potentially have quite significant impacts on the visual appearance of the site. And so I do acknowledge the impacts on residents. It is adjoining a commercial precinct with supermarket and food shops and other stores. And also we have Plenty Road on one side, Main Road, and then also part of La Trobe University. So it's a partly residential area. The height proposed is not entirely inconsistent with other sites in the precinct. For example, we have the Park Hotel in Bundoora across the road. There was only one objection. And often in a site like this, where we do have considerable height, my concern would be around overshadowing. But given the placement of the building, and also this was not raised by objectors, I feel reassured of that. Another consideration often we give when we have these big buildings existing where they didn't before is consideration of the human scale of the street. So I guess, to be honest, I did have mixed feelings about this, partly for that reason. And the conclusion I've come to is that because it is already on a very large, busy road, Plenty Road, we have multiple lanes going both directions. The tram, Main Drive is quite a major road as well, with traffic coming in and out of the university. It's already busy. It doesn't have a quiet residential vibe. It has a busy traffic kind of vibe, and the residential streets are set further back. Also for pedestrians travelling around the Polaris area, they tend to use the internal pathways which have no cars, and Polaris is set around a town centre, so people walking around are unlikely to be using that and feel that large visual presence. Acknowledging these challenges, it's also good to see that this is considered such a desirable location to have interest from a hotel, as stated in the plans, and it is a good place to live for some people, and I'm glad to see developments like this happening in Darebin.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Before we move to Councillor Lawrence, who did second it, I did mean to actually go to Stephen just to note that there was a late addendum report. It doesn't change the officer recommendation, but it did just note one late objection that was received. So apologies. Did you want to add anything further in relation to that?
Through you, Mayor Rennie. I'm just clarifying whether the late objection was distributed. An addendum was produced by officers concerning a late objection from Yarra Trams to this matter. And I'm just clarifying with the officers whether that was in fact distributed to all councillors. Through you, Mayor Rennie, no, it appears to have not been distributed to councillors.
I might actually cross to one of the council staff for a very brief summary of that addendum.
I can certainly do that.
You could, thank you.
After the agenda was finalised for this council meeting, a late objection was received from Yarra Trams in relation to this development plan. As councillors will be aware, under the Planning and Environment Act, council, up until the point it makes a decision on these matters, must consider all objections received. This happens from time to time, and typically what occurs is an addendum is produced, which has been produced and distributed to myself, that draws the council's attention to the objection. This was circulated by email and a hard copy, usually circulated by email and a hard copy of the meeting. In this instance, the conditions applied in the officer's report completely address the point raised in the objection, which relates to active frontages. I apologise for the lack of distribution of that. They should have been in front of all councillors prior to the meeting.
Not a problem, Mr. Mann. I'll just ask if any councillors have any questions before we continue the debate. Yes, Councillor McCarthy.
Sorry, I just wanted to get clarity on one of the final points that was made, that the issues that were raised in objection by Yarra Trams, have they been responded to already in the officer's recommendation? And could we have some explanation as to what those issues are and what that response has been, given that we don't have the document?
So I'll cross over to Mr Rudd for further detail.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. The objection was about the concern about active frontages and concern that there would be blank walls facing Plenty Road because it was adjacent to a tram stop. The first three conditions on the development plan approval address that objection entirely.
Thank you, Mr Rudd. I have a seconder, Councillor Lawrence. So I'd like to go to Councillor Lawrence unless there's other questions that need to be asked before we can hear from the seconder. Councillor Lawrence?
Before I speak to this, can I ask a question that we get clearly the conditions put in front of us so we can consider them in relation to the active frontages and identified where they are and what they look like?
Okay, thank you. So I'll cross over to Mr Rudd again for the specific reference in our report to where those conditions can be found.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, they're on the screen, conditions 1, 2 and 3. So they're concerns about the height of the basement and the slope on the site, and just ensuring that the basement doesn't protrude too much out of natural ground level to create blank walls.
Councillor McCarthy?
Just a question, and it's just because I'm struggling to compare the exact wording, just to confirm that the wording we have on screen is exactly the same as is listed in the report. The report lists a series of letters, A through to K, and I can see 5 points on screen. I'm assuming that there's some overleaf. I just want to make sure that we're all looking at the same thing in terms of the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. They look to me to be the same as points A, B and C in our report on page 39, but I'll just confirm with Mr Rudd that while we have 1, 2 and 3 on the screen, we have A, B and C in our report and that they are in fact the same.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, they're the same.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, over to you as the seconder.
Mayor Rennie, I'm just trying to get visual confirmation of this where in the plans, because I'm a visually trained person. So I just want to cite it. It's section A. Yes, but I want to identify the elevation.
So, Councillor Lawrence, I'm just seeking to be clear on what further information you're after, given that we don't have detailed drawings, I don't believe. But on page 74 of the report, there are some cross sections which might be helpful. Mr Rudd, are you able to assist Councillor Lawrence with that?
Yes, Mayor Rennie, yes, you are correct. Pages 73 and 74 provide some section diagrams. Bearing in mind this is a development plan, so it's meant to be a broad guide, not to the prescriptive level of detail of a planning permit. So what this is doing is it's setting the conditions on which we expect information to be received for a planning permit application.
Thank you. So, Councillor Lawrence, over to you.
Just so I can clarify with the officers, we're talking about section AA, section BB and section CC and DD, identified on page 74.
Yes, that's correct, Mayor Rennie.
And so what I'm just seeking to understand is this section CC and DD appears to be over 1.8 metres high basement, blank wall, and this amendment would decrease that to 1.2, is that correct?
Mayor Reddy, that's those first three conditions do address that concern. That's why I was saying earlier that the Yarra Trams objections are addressed through that condition. So the condition's asking and providing clarity for that to be reduced to 1.2 metres.
Mayor Rennie, I don't normally complain about late Yarra Trams because there's usually another one coming, but with this late submission, I would withdraw my seconding of this motion because...
Okay, you don't need to say anything other than that, so I'll seek a different seconder for the motion. Councillor McCarthy, thank you. So, Councillor Amir, you've spoken, so Councillor McCarthy is the seconder.
Thank you. Regardless of the late submission from Yarra Trams, and I do take utilities and such authorities' concerns seriously, and hence it is good to get the detail, and I'm glad we've taken the time to understand it. As I understand it from A, B and C, which do respond as per our officer advice to those concerns, the proposed height at that frontage point at the natural ground level would be no more than 1.2 metres, which is a different situation to what was proposed, and hence my understanding based on the advice we've just received is that it goes some distance to alleviating those concerns expressed by Yarra Trams. Overall, I think Councillor Amir's commentary is right in terms of this is a development plan. There are processes that have to go underway which are more detailed. They're not processes that we're dealing with tonight. These are processes where we set in place a development plan, agree to it so that it provides a level of certainty for both council and the owner and the developer to proceed, knowing clearly what the ground rules are, where we will and won't go. And on that basis, the work of officers has sought to achieve the best urban outcome in this situation, keeping in mind that there is a lot of detailed work that then follows from this. So I won't comment any further on that, other than that I respect the work that's been done to date and appreciate that those concerns that have been raised by Yarra Trams are picked up by points A, B and C.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers? Councillor Gueco.
Mayor Reddy, I'll be speaking against the recommendation here in the report, and I'll flag that I also have an alternate motion. Should the motion that's before us be rejected. Look, I think in relation to this particular development plan amendment that's been requested by the developers, I think it falls short on a number of grounds. First of all, we have to consider in relation to the basement car park and that the wall that the basement car park will be actually protruding above the ground level over a metre, and I think from an aesthetic perspective that's not acceptable to me. And particularly in that area where we've taken a lot of time and attention in relation to ensuring that the development of that area meets certain standards. Also, there's the issue of the blank wall along Plenty Road, but most concern to me is the heights that have been proposed here. We have there are suggested changes from 3 stories as it currently stands in the development plan to 8 or 9 stories in one section, and from 2 stories to 5 or 6 stories. That is a substantial change from what the previous development plan was. Also, I remind councillors that there's a case before VCAT at the moment in relation to a related area where council is arguing against a development plan amendment from 3 stories to 7 stories. We're standing firm saying that we need to maintain 3 stories in relation to that case that's before VCAT. And I feel that if we were to allow this particular application and allow these additional heights, it would actually compromise us in regards to that particular case. And also will be sending the wrong message in regards to what our intent is in regards to that site.
Thank you, Councillor Gueco. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lyons.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'd speak against this current motion, anticipating a possible deferral motion. I won't address the heights, but I understand that is a legitimate debate the council needs to have. But at present, with this very late-minute addition of an objection from Yarra Trams, and why my hesitation about that is that 1.2 metre basement car park protruding on the Plenty Road side will still effectively create a blank wall because the basement car park needs to be used for a basement car park. So this does not address active street frontages as far as I'm concerned, because active street frontage should create social observation and safety. So that can't be achieved by a car park protrusion of 1.2. Now, I support the intensification of this strip of land. I have fought against 8 stories on the Bundoora Park across the road. This is next to a shopping centre, and we have a desperate situation with the housing in Kingsbury being eroded and being used as rooming houses because the La Trobe Uni, unlike Canadian universities, has never got its act together to provide proper accommodation. So a big increase in accommodation on this site provides safety for university students, which are increasing, international students there too, and people from countryside. So it's really needed housing, but we also have a site here where tragedy occurred earlier in the year, and that's partly by the lonely and windswept nature of that place and the
10
vulnerability.
seconds.
And not having active street front on Plenty Road will create unsafe environment.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lasserf.
I have a question to the officers around Councillor Lawrence mentioned a motion to defer. Are there any time pressures on making a decision around this, given the lateness of that we received the objection from Yarra Trams?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Lasserf. I'll defer to Mr Rudd in relation to timelines.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, there's no time limit as such on development plan decisions, but tomorrow there is a compulsory conference, and that's one of the at VCAT, and that's one of the reasons the matter's been brought forward to the council meeting as opposed to the planning committee.
Thank you for that. Councillor McCarthy, I'm assuming it's a question because you've spoken.
Just a question in relation to what Mr Rudd has just said. If council was to defer consideration of this matter, what would council's position be going into that compulsory conference tomorrow? Just to understand the time pressure factor.
Thank you for that question, Councillor McCarthy. Mr Rudd, are you able to answer that, please?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie, there's, with the compulsory conference tomorrow, it's dealing with 2 lots which are referred to in the report, lots S3 and S9. If the motion or the recommendation was agreed tonight by council, that would confine the matters subject to the compulsory conference tomorrow to lot S3, which is a student accommodation. This relates to a decision by the planning committee to refuse a development plan in April this year. So it simply would mean that tomorrow the issues concerning lot S9 would still be under consideration, so too S3.
Thank you. There may be further questions. Yes.
I need to ask a supplementary just to understand, in the absence of a decision in favour of this, what is the implication? So I understand now what will happen if we make a decision. Where does that leave us if we don't make a decision this evening? Does that mean, and I'll go right to the particular point, does that mean we go in without a clear position in relation to the matters to be considered tomorrow, or does that put us at a disadvantage in some way?
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, there is a position already, which is the April 2019 decision, which was to refuse on various grounds developments on lot S9, similar to those before you, but also lot S3. There is an issue, particularly if council fails or does not make a decision, it may bring together the question of costs.
Thank you, Mr Rudd. Councillor Lawrence, did you have another question?
I just have this question to ask, which is, given the student housing on Main Drive, I think you're calling it S9, what's your S3, your code, I just got to keep up with the code. That decision of council was in regard to protecting the amenity of two-storey housing just across and the character of simple two-storey terraces, which are mainly occupied by academics and students, and where it's a southerly impact. That is the most dramatic impact you can get from towers. So in the absence of us approving 8 and 9 stories tonight, would that actually strengthen our earlier decision of council?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Lawrence. Mr Rudd.
Through you, Mary, that is not the assessment of the report through consideration tonight.
Thank you. Councillors, are there further questions before we move on with the debate? No. So I'll ask, are there any further speakers to the motion? There being none, Councillor Amir, you have a right of reply. No. So Councillor Amir is choosing not to exercise the right of reply, so we'll put this matter straight to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.3 on the agenda. Which is the future of festivals.
Happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Happy to second it.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Amir and seconded by Councillor Williams. Councillor Amir.
So we've had several discussions in this chamber over the last few months about the future of festivals. Of course, here in Darebin, we're very proud of our arts community and want to do what we can to support the many artists and people supporting artists here in Darebin. What's proposed here and the new plan that is included in the agenda, and I encourage people to residents and others to look at it if you haven't had a look. It's very exciting, is a shift in the way that we do arts festivals here in Darebin. So a shift away from having a larger number of small festivals to having 2 festivals a year. The proposal is that they'll increase in length from 1 year to the next up to 8 weeks. So we'll have an autumn festival and a spring festival, and each will provide a broad range of arts offerings. The exciting thing about this model is it's a shift away from having, I suppose, council as the lead to having a much stronger focus on artists as the lead, on community as the lead, and I hope that through this new model we'll be able to engage new artists, new forms of art, new audiences, so that there's truly is something for everyone here in Darebin. The arts ecosystem is complex, and I'm excited that we're shifting to a more contemporary approach in response to that community feedback. It's also going to be more financially efficient from a marketing perspective, and it allows the team to be a lot more structured and deliberate about how these are curated, rather than having to spread their attention across so many different festivals at once. So thank you so much to Vicky and your team for all the very hard work that's gone into this over many, many months. Thank you also to the 458 people who contributed to the consultation period and helped to shape what you see before you tonight. That included artists, industry representatives and residents who were passionate about the arts. So the feedback that was given is that people wanted events that were family friendly, they wanted new experiences, showcasing diverse cultures, lots of community participation, inclusive events, not to lose the focus on food and wine, which is of course very culturally important for us here in Darebin. People wanted events that were affordable, accessible, and in a good location across Darebin. So that's all been incorporated. You can see all of those components here in the plan. So thank you very much to everyone involved. And I also wanted to briefly say thank you very much to everyone who has contributed to the arts community and culture in Darebin over the last few decades. There's been a few signature events and functions here in Darebin that might look a bit different in the years to come. And I want to acknowledge that this builds on that success and the hard work of many people over many decades. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Amir.
Mary, I have 2 questions, if I may, if I can ask.
Yes, you could ask those. You'd rather ask them now than after Councillor Williams has seconded?
Whatever. Take direction from you.
I'm probably inclined to move to Councillor Williams as the seconder, and then as soon as we've had the mover and the seconder, we'll come straight to your questions, Councillor Greco, if that's okay. So, Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to say a big thank you to all our council officers and all those who have been involved in this huge change and shift the way we actually look at art and how we do our events and festivals. This will be an 8 weeks of arts, and arts is going to be different to the way we look at them now. So currently, a lot of our arts where we're not actually engaging much, so therefore we will not be just looking at artwork. This will actually involve all our senses, including hearing, taste, smell and touch. It will also be important that we consider the transport, and it also looks at the hip pocket. So those who are actually having financially, that will be financially feasible for those who are even on the smallest budget can attend. It's important that we did look at many different aspects of looking at the way we do our festivals and events. It was important that we not only go to our normal familiar places, which is your normal Northcote or the Darebin Arts Centre, we're actually engaging other areas, including the Darebin libraries, including more at Bundoora Homestead. We'll also have a lot more new experiences, including showcasing diverse cultures, welcoming nature, more food and wine events, obviously having affordability in all those areas. It's important that we also still retained what we love about our arts and events, so and all that good stuff, but most of all that we'll be looking at new models that will engage potentially more audiences and at new locations, which is really important for those who are going to just only able to hop in on transport and don't have car access. This also is alignment to our council plan and our policy, so it'd be involving, obviously, it would be a sustainable city that we could live well, strong economy and diverse. So our events are incorporating more and more environmental considerations in programming, production and promotions.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco, your questions.
Mayor Reddy, I had 2 questions. The first question is, one of the key elements of this new strategy is that the elements of signature historical events will, there'll be elements of the signature historical events. And I'm just wondering if we can unpack that a little bit more, because I think it's such a crucial part of this strategy that it would be good to get some more information in relation to that particular point.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Greco. I might pass to Ms Guglielmi for a response.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. In direct response to that question, we're really building on the success of tradition and our cultural heritage here in the city. Key signature events like the homemade food and wine, the pillars of that are the Meet the Makers, which really engages with local makers, both food, wine and beer. And we're seeing the trend of makers really expanding beyond those 3 items or elements which are being made in our kitchens, in our backyards, but also in our local micro businesses. And so Council has an important role to play in opening up those channels. We will absolutely continue to award and recognise the contribution that local makers make, but we also have an important function to bridge the gap between local makers working with beautiful product in their homes to the businesses that are doing that successfully in an entrepreneurial way to great success in international markets right here in Darebin. Beer is a growing tradition in Darebin. We're seeing an emergence of that industry here, but at the same time we're declining in our local makers in wine. So we have an important role to make sure there are platforms where we celebrate, acknowledge, as well as recognise that we are both working at the local level and at the business level. So this festival is trying to do that without throwing out the good elements of what is just celebrating our great creativity locally.
Thank you for that response, Councillor Greco.
The second question is that the new strategy makes a strong point about the diversification of participants and audiences, but I'd just like to get some more information on how that will be achieved.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, through you, Mayor Rennie. it's very important to understand that we're in this model. We're bringing two approaches that are tried and tested successes in the festival model in Australia, and that is a curated model where we're bridging the audiences and artists to come together in unique and interesting ways with unique and interesting ideas. We're also bringing what is a fringe type model, which is an open access, which taps into what is already happening here and what people are doing and engaging in locally. Audiences want a bit of both. Our engagement has shown that they want something unusual, interesting but stimulating. And I think we are using these platforms of open access and curated in a way that draws out not just local audiences, and there is a debate around what is an audience and what is an artist, and there's a fine line between that, Councillor. And so I think what we're trying to do is establish those platforms to which our audiences and our artists can come together in these unique spaces. Some concepts we have are around bringing art where it normally traditionally isn't. We are also bringing art and community participation in where art normally is engaged, so in our venues. But places like Darebin Parklands is a really untapped natural resource where we could be bringing some quite meaningful, poetic, beautiful experiences that are created by artists or with communities' collaboration. So we're looking at diversity in a very way where programming as well as marketing is driving that diversity, and we are at a very different place right now to where we want to be in about a year's time.
Thank you for that response. Councillor Greco, any further questions? Okay, so further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to acknowledge the presence not only of our manager, Vicky, for the arts area, but also some of the wonderful staff that actually do some very detailed work to make these things as polished and brilliant as they are. And I almost feel like we need to declare a conflict in relation to this item, because those of us that go to lots of Darebin's festivals know how great they are and benefit enormously, but that benefit is shared by the community at large, so we don't need to declare conflict as councillors, but we are deeply invested in this, because it is not just the artistic and cultural practices that we are supporting through this new festivals framework. It's actually the social wellbeing and economic life of the city. And I'll just touch on the fact that what I really like about this is that it's a future-focused strategy with absolute respect for the great things in the present and the past. And I have relatives who had no other reason to come to Darebin apart from visiting us, but they come for our festivals because they love them so much. They don't pay rates here, but they probably would love to live here if they could. And for me, those sorts of festivals and events, things in the past, like the Backyard Harvest Festival, for instance, and the Darebin Music Feast, have been points of engagement for people beyond our city who get to know Darebin in a different way, other than just the built form and the natural spaces. What I really like about this, though, is that it's simplicity and elegance in terms of setting up two seasonal festival periods and finding ways to bring things from one season into another and vice versa. And that sense of rhythm and interflow between these two festivals, the autumn and spring, is really exciting, because for someone to come to one and then to go to the next, they're actually going to be part of of things that have evolved over time, and that's great. These are not standalone festivals. These are not in an absence of some broader context. They are directly part of the cultural life of our city, and I'm very pleased to support this, and I thank all the work that's gone into this by officers and artists as well.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I'd really like to commend our officers on this report. I always find what comes from the arts and culture team is really strategic and thoughtful, particularly about what makes Darebin unique. And I think it's really great this is called The Way Forward, because I think it could be really easy to say that what we've done in the past, like just a food and wine festival, etc., is what we should always do. But I think what I love about the idea of having two key festivals through the year, with autumn with art and design and spring with music and literature, is that it brings the best of what we've been doing so far to make it more strategic and make it something that's a real draw card for the city. I'm really pleased that it's going to continue to be family friendly, showcasing diverse cultures and be participatory. And I also note that the report talks about the clustering effect and how important that is to draw people into the festivals. I know certainly when I like to go to a Melbourne Writers' Festival or a Sydney Writers' Festival, having so many good things at the same time is really pleasing. And I often go out with my friends to Sydney for the weekend for the Sydney Writers' Festival, and there's so much on. And I can absolutely see that what we might have here with these two festivals is something similar, where the draw card goes way, way beyond just our city. And of course, the bulk of artists will be from our city, but the people that will come will be from far beyond. So I'm really pleased by that. And I just really want to add that, in the 3 years I've been on council, what I've seen come from the arts and culture team in terms of what's at the Bundoora Homestead, how accessible events are at the Northcote Town Hall, the improvements to Darebin Arts Centre. I'm just seeing all of this stuff happening, seeing the city change, and it's been really incredible. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Messina.
Through you, Mary, I wanted to say if there's a gold medal in anything to do with arts and culture, then I think it should come to Darebin, because they kick so many goals, the team. I'm just so overwhelmed with the strategies that they keep on coming up. Darebin Music Arts Festival, the Darebin Homemade Food and Wine Festival and the Kite Festival just happen to be my favourite festivals. The Darebin Home Food and Wine Festival in particular, not only does it brings me back to my roots, but being a cultural snob, it gives me access to the homes that people, some of the makers invite us to. I was privileged enough to go to the one that was, the lady, I've forgotten her name, but she invited me to a home. There was a workshop where she showcased her preservation of food, and also went to a home where they actually showed how he made his own wine. Art, music and food and diversity is our strength here in Darebin, and music, food and the arts, whether it's a painting, a lyric or a story, brings us back to our childhood. It takes us back to a time and place where we first learned to develop our memory. So I think we have a connection when it comes to food, we have a connection when it comes to arts. And I'm also pleased that this particular strategy festival will actually highlight an undervalued asset in our community, and that is the Bundoora Homestead. It's such a joyful place to go, and I love going there. And it's going to showcase that as well as the Darebin Arts and Entertainment Centre. And I'm really proud of this particular strategy, because what it's going to do is showcase Darebin as the cultural queen of Melbourne. So I'm looking forward to the evolution in that statement, and perhaps you can use it in the literature, that Darebin, the cultural queen of Melbourne. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'm happy to support the adoption of this report and creation of a new framework. One thing I'd sort of, encourage people to think about is that in all these things, writing, live music and visual arts and multicultural culture, which underpins the food, the live music and things that go on in this city, they go on outside of these council programs. So in some ways, the Food and Wine Festival reflected certain cultural traditions, and the Kite Festival reflected certain cultural traditions with outside and with recreation with the park. So they were just two success stories, but there's so many smaller success stories on multiculturalism. The bars, the live music bars in Darebin, an absolute representation of African music, reggae, Latin, gypsy, European, Asian cultures all going on at the same time, and obviously the food as well. So I still look at this report and see we haven't quite got a vision of how to activate that natural cultural areas or activities which are driven by the community itself. And, I suppose the word multiculturalism just comes up time and time again with both of them. So when you talk spring and autumn, or you talk about seasons even, in this city, we celebrate Northern Hemisphere festivals all the way through October that are quite from unique backgrounds, Middle East, Europe and Asia. And so I think we're still kind of suppressing that character and we're not lifting that up.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? No, there being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried unanimously. We'll note that that was unanimous and thank the team very much for their work. That brings us to item 8.4 on the agenda. Councillor McCarthy?
Happy to move that and insert Councillor Stefani's name on point 1.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
She accepts.
You accept, and is there a seconder, or did I take that as being this? Okay, seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'm pleased Councillor Amir is happy to continue having played a significant role in, I think, first bringing this into the chamber a couple of years ago, following some discussions with one of our local cycling advocates around a different way of thinking about the travel routes around our local schools. And this notion of octopus schools is something that is actually unique to Darebin. It is a Darebin-based program, and it is the sort of thing which we would love to see more of, not just in Darebin but elsewhere. I've actually had a chance in the lead up to tonight's report to go and have a look at how the two previous sites are rolling out in terms of the actual works that have taken place, and also interestingly the fact that we've had a couple of other schools that have been able to benefit from this program despite not being the chosen schools. And I think that's actually a wonderful flow-on effect, that we've been able to not only do great work, for instance, as is reported here at Newlands Primary, but also to provide similar benefit to a couple of our other schools, including Thornbury. So why I mention that is because it is not often the case that we have programs like this where council makes a commitment early on in the term to do something a little bit different, which is really about activating and mobilising some of that community energy, particularly to make it possible for students to get to school by bike or walking in the safest possible way, but also to signal to everyone else in that neighbourhood that these are designated routes where we want to prioritise those traffic movements for those children. And having two children that walk and ride to school, my school is not an octopus school, but it actually has its kind of octopus feel around it. I know how valuable that is as a parent, to know that my children can ride safely to school, and that's what we're delivering for these other schools through this process. So happy to obviously recommend Councillor Amir continue on as a staunch cycling advocate and everyday cyclist, and not yet a parent of a primary school aged child, so there is no conflict there either, which is great. And I just ended on that point.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Sorry, before we go on, I just wanted to check with the officers. I think they sent around an alternative wording, and that the travel safe officer might be somebody else.
Can I just check with Ms Olivia? I think that might have been in response to a possible alternate motion. So,
you're correct, Mayor Rennie.
My motion's mixed up.
yes, so I think this is the motion. Had an alternate motion been proposed, there might have been a different combination of staff. So, great. Thank you for that point of clarification, Councillor Lasserf. Councillor Amir.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for adding my name to the motion. I'd be very excited to be involved again. As you mentioned, this was something that I brought to the chamber probably 2.5 years ago now, with an idea from a Darebin resident. So the idea being that schools can have 8 safe cycle routes to get to school, which we've extended through the program to be 8 active transport routes, with a vision of creating many safe ways to get to school, and over time extending the number of schools to create safe travel routes all across Darebin. So this is now the 3rd year of the Octopus Schools program, with Council currently working with Newlands Primary School as the current Octopus School, along with Thornbury Primary and William Ruthven Primary School. So thank you to the transport team for your hard work, both with the infrastructure side and the education and behavioural change side of the program. So I have been the council representative for the last 2 years, and it's something that's very important to me as a cyclist, as well as, of course, we know the very great health benefits, social benefits and environmental benefits of encouraging people to take active transport options. We also know that encouraging young people to ride to school and ride around their local neighbourhood then can set up habits for life, which hopefully leads to greater use of active transport over fossil fuel powered transport as those children grow up into the future. So the decision will be made with the expert input from our transport team, who have good knowledge of the school context and also the local infrastructure context. Consideration given to the commitment of the schools to become an octopus school, the capacity to be able to implement the parts of the program, as well as the physical environment context. So I'd encourage everyone to speak with any schools in your network to encourage them to apply.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, Mayor Rennie, I have an amendment to the motion. It was originally as an alternate motion, but it's only really the second part of my alternate motion, which I would like the mover and the seconder to consider. So hopefully it will come up on the screen.
So just your second part two
Just
to
my second
confirm,
part,
not the whole alternate. So I'll just see if the officers are able to get up Councillor Greco's part two as a proposed amendment. So I'll just check in with Councillor McCarthy.
Sorry, just to be clear, that the substantive change then would be that instead of it being decided upon by the...
One would still remain as it was, so we seem to have lost one, but we'll put one back would be as it was before.
But it would change from the general manager making the decision under delegation to council.
Receives a report to a future council meeting. So we'll get point one back up because that would still be there. And the two that we had before would be replaced by this two. So, Councillor McCarthy, you may have a question about that, or you may understand that, subject to point one being back on screen as it was before, that point two would now read as that, and that's the proposed amendment.
Look, I'm happy to accept that, that's fine.
Okay, and that was accepted by the seconder. So, Councillor Greco, that has been accepted, so that's now the substantive motion.
I thank the mover and the seconder for accepting the change. The only comments that I make, and I fully endorse what the two councillors have already said about this really important and also very innovative program. Just as a side note, when I was a kid, I used to walk to school and cycle to school, but they were very, very different times to what they are now. And walking and cycling to school for very, very different reasons back then. But the second part of my the motion there is that I think it's important that the council is seen to be the decision maker in relation to the selection of the school, so that what I envisage and what the amendment does is that the advisory committee will consider the schools that are seeking to participate in the program, and I get the impression that there'll be a lot of competition in terms of coming forward. But then that will come to council as a recommendation, and then council can be seen to be publicly making a decision in relation to which school that they select. I think it's good governance, and I think it shows a level of transparency in terms of the way we make decisions, particularly around these particular initiatives which involve the selection or otherwise of particular schools. So I thank the mover and the seconder for including this as part of the substantive motion.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lasserf.
I'm actually unsure about whether I want to support this motion anymore with that amendment that was put forward by Councillor Greco. Only to say that previous rounds of the Octopus School program was decided under similar circumstances in terms of delegation to the General Manager. And I think that is a good process because it goes through a rigorous independent process with councillors' involvement through the advisory panel. But for it to come back to council and for council to make a decision, particularly, and I'm going to be blunt, particularly in the lead up to an election within the next year or so, there could be an opportunity that politics is played on this decision, and I don't think that is fair. I think it's a really strong program, and that the last rounds have been really successful. We've got really good media out of it. We've had really good results on the ground. And I don't think that we need to change the process at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? No, there being none, I'll put that to the vote.
Sorry, can I
Yep,
I'll just
Councillor
exercise
McCarthy.
my right of reply.
Sure.
And I thank Councillor Lasserf for her comments. And I actually had to go through that same mental process that Councillor Lasserf has just undertaken. But I'm going to hedge a bet that this chamber can follow the advice of an expert advisory panel of people that know what they're talking about, that have gone through the application processes in detail and have done the work. And so my challenge to this chamber, even if this decision is a decision that is made in an election year, is do we back and trust the experts? Do we listen closely to what they have to say? And are we capable of making a decision based on strong, well-grounded evidence, which is what I would expect would come to this chamber to support that. So that's the challenge that I put to my fellow councillors, and I would hope that we step up to that challenge, as we should, because that is actually what the community expects of us. It's also, I would say, what the schools applying would expect of us. So I would like to think that regardless of what the expert advisory panel puts forward, that we look deeply and closely at what they say, and that we give due consideration, as we should, to their recommendation. That's not to say that that locks in we're backing their recommendation, but we would have a very hard time and a very poor time to be going against that if it's not grounded in, if it's grounded in good evidence and a good argument. So I trust the chamber. I'm going to ask the chamber to trust our schools and the expert advisory panel in that process.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. That brings us to the end of consideration of reports, and that now means we are at item 9 on the agenda, consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motion and general business. There are none. So we are now at item 10, notices of motion. I note that Councillor Lawrence has had to leave due to not feeling well. Councillor Lawrence has requested in writing that his noms be withdrawn. So I've got that in an email that Councillor Lawrence has given. So on the grounds that that's been received in writing, I'll take that those noms are withdrawn. So that brings us to the reordered agenda. Earlier in the meeting, just wait 1 second. So we had resolved to deal with the urgent business after the noms. We've now had that item. So Councillor Messina had an item that, as with the others, the CEO had deemed not to be urgent business. Councillor Messina, I believe you wish to ask the chamber to consider that as urgent business. Yep, so we'll get the NOM up on the screen. Or the urgent business rather, sorry, not NOM. So,
Excuse me, Mayor Rennie, can I please note that single-use plastic products and polystyrene be added? So problematic polystyrene and single-use plastic products, including plastic wrappings on food and supermarkets, be included, please.
so in point 3. Okay. So Councillor Messina has moved that that be accepted as urgent. Is there a seconder for that?
Can we?
Peter seconded.
Sorry, can we just read? Can we just
Okay.
read it? 'Cause it's literally changing. Can I ask just some clarity in relation to the fourth point, which I don't understand the sentence? I think it needs some different words.
Rights to the state government requesting that it establish or advocate to the state government. Yeah, okay.
The state government does the container deposit legislation and the federal government does the rest.
So you need to delete or advocate to state government.
Can I?
So that it establish a container deposit scheme and advocate or something. We'll try and get the words right.
Sorry, Mayor, can I just short circuit that a little bit? Or, if there is a seconder, then, or you can't second and amend it. So I just note Council already has a standing position advocating for a container deposit scheme that's been in place for over a decade. Or for a decade.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Could Councillor McCarthy please repeat that?
We're getting into the debate.
We are,
Debate,
so
we're just, it's fine.
okay, so Councillor Messina, you are putting forward a motion that this be considered as urgent business.
I'm happy to support that to hear the reasons for its urgency.
Yep.
Okay, so Councillor Messina, that's been seconded by Councillor Lasserve. You're now able to speak to why this should be considered urgent. So please, and I said this to councillors before, don't debate the merits of the motion. What we're debating is whether or not it's urgent.
I'm the current chair of the Metro Waste Metropolitan Group, and I put up this notice of motion at the forum on Thursday evening, and it was then decided that what we needed to do was bring this notice of motion to the chamber, to individual council chambers where it could be debated whether they would support this urgent motion, support the motion, and then it would come forth to the next Waste Forum meeting to discuss whether we would then go forward with this particular motion. So I've tweaked it to write to the Minister directly rather than going to the board. I found that the delegates in that particular forum were not as progressive and proactive as some of my thoughts in relation to waste. And I was not aware that I actually could ask my fellow councillors to consider this as an urgent motion. It was only until I saw the, and I thank them for giving me the privilege to put this on the, at the moment. I was not aware that I could do that. And it was only until Councillor Lawrence had put forth his urgent notice of motions that I decided to do that.
Sorry, Councillor Williams, there's no reason to interrupt Councillor Messina.
I just don't understand why it was urgent. Hasn't stipulated
So,
why it's
sorry,
urgent.
Councillor Williams, that's my call. Okay, I'll ask you not to interrupt Councillor Messina. Councillor Messina, back over to you.
Oh, can I now speak?
No, well, have you finished? I wasn't sure that Councillor Messina had
The reason
finished
it's urgent
speaking.
is that I wanted to gain traction not only from this council but from other...
Sorry, Councillor Messina, had you finished speaking or were you interrupted and sat down because...
I sat down because I was interrupted.
Okay, so there was about, yep, that's about right, 1 minute 50 left on the clock. So you can
Well, I would
continue.
like to answer that question. The reason being is that I wanted to bring this forward to this particular chamber so that other councillors and other councils at other particular municipalities also take this stance and then bring it to the Waste Forum. That's why it's urgent.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Lasser.
I'd like to speak because I am the seconder, but I do have a question in terms of when the next Metro Waste Management Group meeting, or whatever they're called, is. And I'm not sure Councillor Messina should be responding because it's... Does anyone else know when that is?
Okay, can we ask Ms Olivier for the date of the next Metropolitan Waste Forum?
If you would give me 5 minutes to double check or 2 minutes to double check, I will. We've just had one last week and I would expect the next one to be after the next council meeting, but I would need to eyeball the date.
It's my understanding it might be in November.
Okay. I support admitting this as an urgent business item because Councillor Messina, I think, submitted the notice of motion before the last Metro Group meeting. This is a bit of a moving feast at the moment in terms of addressing the recycling crisis. And circumstances have changed since you did submit that NOM in terms of its urgency, in terms of the outcomes of the meeting at the Metro Waste Management Group, Waste and Resource Recovery Group, because they've asked us to come back and consider these as individual councils to take back to the next meeting. I don't think we should necessarily wait to the next council meeting because I think that we have been, but we need to continue to be putting pressure on the state government through advocacy. And this, I guess, just adds to the different things we might be advocating for and put some specifics around it. The other thing I'd like to see, though, is whether there are other things that we should be asking the state government to do. This is a start, and perhaps officers have some more insights and things to add to this list. So I'm happy to admit it now so that we can decide whether this is the right list as well.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers to the issue of whether it's urgent? Yes, there are. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I really appreciate all of the intent of this motion, but similar to the last urgent motions that we've had, if the CEO has said that they're not considered urgent, then I think the best process for us is to not consider them urgent. And if the next meeting is in November, then I think there is time to take this as a NOM to the next meeting, or a notice of motion, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Newton.
Sorry, can I just ask a point of clarification, or ask a question?
Yes.
Given circumstances had changed from when Councillor Messina submitted the motion to now, would the councillor make a different determination on its urgency? Does that make sense to the CEO?
Great question.
Yeah.
I'm going to refer that to the CEO.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. The essence of the local law is really very clear. What it says is that council must only admit urgent business if it cannot be deferred conveniently or safely to the next meeting. I acknowledge that this has many moving parts and is constantly changing on a daily basis. The question council needs to satisfy itself is whether or not these activities can wait 3 weeks.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, and I'll respectfully acknowledge the various contributions that have been made to this debate. I actually do feel a sense of urgency in relation to this, not because of anything to do with the particular waste forum. I actually feel that that's actually not the relevant consideration here, but rather the possibility and likelihood of significant state government action in the next month, particularly in this space. And Councillor Messina's proposal, point 1, which I think is actually the most significant part of this because it is new, it is not part of the current public debate, and it is essential that it is brought to the debate, is actually the matter of urgency. I will propose some slight amendments to the wording of this motion if it is admitted as urgent business, but it is actually a crucial component of inserting in the public debate. The failure of the particular forum to pick up on Councillor Messina's proposal, I think, is disappointing, but this is a council that has been directly affected and has to take its matters seriously, and needs to undertake some urgent advocacy along the lines of the first point, as Councillor Messina has pointed out. And I thank her for her persistence on that front as well.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm happy to support the inclusion of this urgent motion. I think for the reasons that have been outlined, particularly for the fact that given that there was the Waste Management Committee meeting, and given that this was an issue of discussion, and given everything that's surrounding waste management at the moment, and also that we'll be discussing some of that later on as a confidential item, I think it's incumbent on us to include this and also to make a decision on this. And I really pick up on the point that Councillor Lasserf made, is that if we include this tonight and we make a decision on it, it will give us time for officers to actually build around this particular motion in order then to present at a later Waste Forum committee. If we wait till the next meeting, then there may not be enough time for officers to actually do that work. And also, in practical terms, I don't want to come back in 3 weeks' time where this motion will be put as an ordinary notice of motion, and then we're obviously going to support something of this nature.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? There being none, we'll put this to vote. So we're voting on whether to accept this as an urgent item. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried, so the item has been accepted as urgent onto the agenda. Councillor Messina, you're moving the motion. And is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Greco, thank you. Councillor Messina.
Thank you, councillors. It's been 18 months since China closed its doors to our recycling industry. Our residents consider waste an essential item. In fact, some actually demand that it is a quintessential service that council must provide. Currently, the recycling industry has Polytrade, Busy and Reground in Canberra as our only service possibility provider. We all know about SKM and its closure and the fires. This motion is asking the Minister to put in place a service to alert the residents, in particular local government areas, to put in place a service to alert our residents when we have a disruption by a service provider. Melbourne has 4 landfill sites. 3 will remain open, but in 7 years we will have 1 that will be closing its doors. That's an extra 1 million tonnes per annum. Where will that go? And that's what my concern is. It's not just economical and it's not just environmental, but it's also about social implications. We were going to have waste that is going to be built up if we don't alert our residents of what we are doing in the case of any disruption. Not all our residents have access to social media. Not all our residents watch TV and understand when SKM closes its doors. Some of them don't even know who our service provider is. So how do we message and alert our residents when we have issues in relation to our waste? When we look at our waste and consider it as an item that we discard, we forget that 38% is actually food waste. So what are we doing in that particular area? And we are looking at how we are going to move forward with our, sorry, my phone just went, forward with our rapid waste, food waste recycling program. We have, whilst we focus on all that, we are also forgetting about our textiles industry. We also need textiles companies to look at sustainable clothing. Textile waste, we aren't addressing that at all. So we assume that we give our clothing to the Salvos and the Savers, but where does it go? But what we really do need is a circular economy. Waste is a concern, and it is evolving quite a rapid rate. Sorry, I wasn't expected. A rapid rate. I'm so passionate about this particular area, and what I'm trying to say to this particular council is not coming across. But what I'm saying is that this is a crisis, and at every crisis we have an opportunity, and we need to move and alert the state government as to what is actually taking place, because our residents, some of them know, some of them don't know, but the SKM closure has caused issues, not only monetary value items issues, but also issues with stockpiling, where we are taking our waste to landfill. We don't want our waste to go to landfill, and the implication of it going there is huge, an impact on Melbourne.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Greco.
Mayor Reddy, look, I'll reserve my right to speak after hearing others.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
I'd actually like to propose a couple of minor word changes, which hopefully will be acceptable to the mover and seconder. The first one would be in the first opening line where it says that council writes to replace the word state government with relevant state ministers.
So we'll deal with that one first. That's acceptable to the mover?
Relevant state ministers and local MPs.
And local MPs. Councillor Greco, is that acceptable to you?
I just want to see what it is.
Is that state and federal MPs?
I can insert the word all local MPs if that helps provide clarity.
That's fine.
Yep.
So check that's acceptable to the mover. Is that acceptable to the seconder? Yes, so that's been accepted.
And the second point the second change is under dot point 1, is to make reference to the relevant legislation. And I'll just seek confirmation from officers in relation to this, but my understanding is that the relevant legislation is the Essential Services Act 1958. No? It's under the Local Government Act.
Can I seek a question or seek an answer from the CEO as to the necessity of that, because we can probably put it in when we write.
Through you, Mayor, I don't think it's necessary to specify it in the legislation. My understanding is it's the Local Government Act if it's referring to procurement requirements. So if the intent of it being declared an emergency is to bypass the procurement requirements under Section 186, that provision sits within the Local Government Act because it usually pertains to natural disasters, floods, fires, for example, that allow councils to just go and get on with dealing with the community issues. My understanding is that that is what Councillor Messina is getting to, that rather than having to go through the state process, that it's about declaring it as an emergency in that context.
Thank you. Satisfied in relation to that point. And the fourth...
Sorry, can I just... no, so...
I just wanted to check the intent then of the first dot point in that an essential service is a highly regulated market that everyone is entitled to receive and therefore would need to be inserted into the Act, not responding to it in an emergency. I think they're different things. I just seek further clarification.
Thank you. I'll take that as a question, Councillor Lasserf, and I'll refer that to Ms Olivier in respect to what we would understand, because it may impact on the way the letter is drafted by that being declared an essential service.
So, to be honest, I think there are several ways of interpreting it, and one essentially is to elevate it as an advocacy point that it's an essential service and should be treated with a level of seriousness. I also, as the CEO said, the other way to treat it is in regards to allowing council to get on with dealing with the problem. And I guess finally, I would not have interpreted that statement in that form as a direction to ask that it get formally inserted into the Essential Services Act.
Thank you. I'll ask the CEO to add to that.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So just to get very particular, the allocation in the first dot point, it refers to recycling and waste services. So we have had advice, for example, that because that indicates that because recycling at the moment has the opportunity to go to landfill, it's not, in fact, it would be very difficult for council to declare that as emergency under Section 186 for procurement purposes. The inclusion of waste services there actually complicates this beyond the recycling topic. Councillor Messina will need to make it clear whether that was the intent.
Okay. Councillor McCarthy, I'll come back to you because you had amendments.
Yes, and look, and I just would note, and I would seek clarity then, because the reason for reference to the Essential Services Act was that the Essential Services Act actually empowers particular ministers in relation to a range of services which include such things such as transport, fuel, light power, water, sewerage. Very different provision to what we're discussing here in relation to the Local Government Act. So hence seeking, I would propose then an alternative which is just declared an essential service under relevant legislation and leave it to the officers to determine which is the legislation.
Okay. So we'll take that as an amendment that the words under relevant legislation would be added. Councillor Messina, is that acceptable to you to add the words under? And Councillor Greco, is that acceptable? Yes. So those words are now added. Councillor McCarthy, did you have further amendments? Or Councillor Lasserve?
Could I, has Councillor McCarthy finished with his amendments?
That's enough for the moment.
Can I add to that sentence? Oh, this is horrible. Including considering how it might be addressed through the Essential Services Commission Act to the end of the under relevant legislation?
Can you read that out slowly again so they can get it down?
Recycling and waste services be declared an essential service under relevant legislation, including consideration of, oh, that's not right, including whether the Essential Services Commission Act 2001 there should be a commission, Essential Services Commission Act, sorry.
We'll add that in.
Whether the Essential Services Commission Act 2001 is appropriate.
Councillor Messina, is that acceptable to you? And Councillor Greco, is that acceptable to you?
I'm happy with that. I would have thought it would be covered under development legislation.
I mean, I'm happy to debate it.
Okay, well, if it's not accepted, then we'll move to finding out if it's got a seconder. So it's not accepted.
No,
that's just a no. Okay, so
For the purpose of the debate, can I listen to her rationale?
yeah, absolutely. That's why you don't accept it, so that it gets debated. So that's been proposed by Councillor
I would like to
Lasserve,
move that.
seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserve.
The only reason why I wanted to point out that I would like this to be considered is because the officer's response to our question about what relevant legislation point one would affect was that they interpreted it as affecting the Local Government Act. Now, an essential service has a very specific definition under this Act and is therefore a more regulated market in terms of how the actual service is provided and at what cost and who provides it. I think that given where we are today in terms of the recycling crisis and the inaction by state government, even though that they've known that this is coming for over 5 years, it is important that we explore every avenue to make sure that they get up and start acting. Now, I think this is a very interesting path to go down, exploring whether it should be an essential service, and I think that we need to make it very explicit about what we mean by it. And what I mean by it is having a look at that Act, not other acts. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Do you wish to add anything?
Only that Councillor Lasserve summed up my point much better than I ever could have, and I would support her proposal.
Thank you. Are there further speakers to Councillor Lasserve's amendment? No. So we'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Okay, so that is now the motion. Councillor Amir.
Sorry, but I'd like to propose an amendment.
Yes?
I'd like to remove dot point number 2, and I'm happy to debate why.
So Councillor Amir has proposed the amendment which would see the removal of dot point 2. Is that acceptable to Councillor Messina and Councillor Greco? It's yes or no? You can hear the debate? No. Okay. So is there a seconder for Councillor...
Purpose of the debate.
Okay, so that amendment has been seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
So while I acknowledge Councillor Messina's very good intent around wanting all residents to know and understand how their waste collection will be affected by these changes that are happening at a council or state level, I have a couple of concerns with this approach. I've got two concerns. Before I mention them, I just want to clarify that in the two cases we've seen where SKM has been shut down, council has continued to collect waste from all residents as per the regular schedule. So the impact while there is an impact on residents in terms of people have the right to know what is happening to their waste, in regards to knowing when to put their bins out and whether it will be collected, council has demonstrated through these two crises that we're committed to consistent collection. So the concern about people's bins not being collected hasn't come to fruition. So I think that's important context. My two concerns are as follows. Firstly, we've seen loud and clear the minister is not our ally. She has said very clearly, blamed councils for things that are beyond our control. And to be really blunt, I don't trust her on the state government not to provide misleading, intentional or otherwise, misleading information to residents. That's one concern. Within that, it may be that the information is slightly different between councils. That could lead to confusion. We could see messages going out that's not quite on point. That means that residents fear that their bins won't be collected when actually they will be collected. So I'm really worried that a message, if it's from the state government, we can't control it, we don't know what it's going to say, if it's not quite right, that could cause a lot of fear and confusion among residents. My second point is, sending a text message to all residents, so, 160,000 residents in Darebin, probably not all of them have mobile phones, could lead to other unintended consequences as a method of communication. So when we've seen this used in by other groups, most recently by the Palmer United Party during the federal election, the overwhelming response was outrage and fear. And I acknowledge it's a different context because it's not political campaigning, but what we saw from a lot of people is people panicking and feeling very fearful that the security of their contact details was compromised, people thinking, how did they get my phone number and what else are they going to do with it? It made people worry about their personal safety, and others, even if they recognised that it wasn't compromised, that they felt it was very invasive, and that was a source of anger. Secondly, if council is not in control of the timing of that message, if it's up to the state government, we don't know when that's going to happen, and the impact of then having thousands and thousands of residents panically phone calling council would be a huge strain on council staff, and I don't think that's a reasonable thing to do.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. It was seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Anything to add? Nothing to add. Are there any further speakers to this amendment? Councillor Greco.
Just to make a few points in relation to it. I see the intent behind that second point, and to me, what actually strikes me is that essentially residents have a right to know what is happening in regards to their recycle waste collection. So if residents are not informed about that, then it's really providing misinformation to residents in regards to they are paying council in terms of their rates, and in terms, more importantly, in terms of the promise that councils make in regards to recycled waste being collected and properly recycled, and if that information is not transmitted to residents of what exactly is happening to that waste, I think that's sort of a misrepresentation of what actually then is occurring. So essentially, I suppose my point is that what's wrong with the community having the right to know when things do go pear-shaped in situations that have just previously happened, and I think that we should treat the community with a little bit more respect and a little bit more intelligence in terms of them knowing when these situations occur and actually being informed of these situations.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I'd like to speak in opposition to the amendment, just because I think that this is something that has caused a lot of concern in our community, and it is a very quickly changing environment. So if text messages are available that could get that information out really quickly, and even if it's not that bins aren't being picked up, but if it is that, you know, your recycling is going to have to go to landfill and this is your options, like, I think that's a really good thing. And I was just thinking about, you know, we do sort of have a lot less letters and everything that day. Not everyone opens their mail. So even if you were to do a letter drop, not everyone's going to get that either. Whereas I think mobile phones are absolutely on the uptake. And I was thinking about, you know, something like if you were going to have your water off for half a day or something like that, for a lot of people a text message is going to be more effective than a letter that might only go to one person in the household, for example. So for me, I think it's unlikely that this will probably happen, but I think it's worth putting forward as an option.
Thank you. A question as opposed to speaking to the amendment?
Well, it's about the amendment.
Okay, you may ask a question.
How would they obtain people's personal information? Wouldn't they have to sign something over to allow, and how would they get it?
Okay, so that's a question about access to information. I'll refer that to Ms Olivier.
Look, my understanding is that under some of the provisions, there are situations where the state government can text mobile phones within a particular geographic area, and my understanding was that Councillor Messina was seeking to tap into those provisions that allow the state to communicate to people.
Thank you. The CEO has something further to add.
Through you, Mayor Reddy. My understanding of that technology is that it's area-based technology, so it's like a sort of a big bomb across an area. So it's actually not limited to property owners or people necessarily with bins, but everybody within an area, a geographic area, who have a mobile phone would receive a text message. So it's not specific to properties.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Are there further speakers to the amendment? No, there being none, we'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost. So we'll take the line off that. Are there further amendments? No? Okay, so we're back onto the debate on this motion. We've heard from Councillor Messina. Councillor Greco reserved his right to speak. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco, would you like to take up your right to speak?
Yeah, I'd just like to speak in favour of the motion that's here before us. Look, I suppose the main point that I'm coming to this question is that it is a pressing question of all the local government issues at the moment. I think this will be perhaps one of the top issues confronting local government at the moment. You know, just today, actually, just before coming to council, our rubbish collection is tomorrow, and I put out my bin. I put out my normal rubbish bin and my waste bin, and then it just occurred to me right then. I thought, well, you know, I should have put it all in one bin because it doesn't make any difference, you know. And just thinking that, I think it's a great sort of disappointment that the community has to go through in regards to the recycle waste collection fiasco that we're going through at the moment. You know, having said that, you know, I understand the circumstances of, you know, the market failures in relation to providing proper, reliable and sustainable recyclable waste collection, but you know, this shouldn't continue. And I think that, and this is why I've supported this motion as an urgent motion, I'm going to support it now. I think by putting these motions forward, even as urgent motions, just shows, again, the sense of urgency that we have as councils, particularly as Darebin Council, in trying to get to some resolution over these issues. And I think by putting something forward like this to the state government, it shows that it's a burning issue and that we really need to deal with it. And the final point that I would make, and something that really I'm flabbergasted by, is that the state government, I believe, has $500 million that is collected through levies for waste collection, and is not prepared or hasn't been prepared for many, many years now to actually put that money to some good use, and instead of relying on overseas countries
Thank you.
to take our waste, that we could do something here on the national front.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll put that,
Oh, the debate hasn't closed, has it?
no, we can, well,
Sorry to
Councillor
really do
Greco had
this.
reserved his right, and then I'd come back to him because nobody else, so actually I think it has closed. If you'll accept my ruling, otherwise I can seek governance advice. Okay, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 11 on the agenda, reports of standing committees. There are none. Item 12, records of assemblies of councillors, moved by
Have an
councillor.
amendment.
Yes, and what's the...
My name is not put in for the briefing, which I attended on the 29th of July, Monday.
So we'll just go to the 29th of July. No, good pick up, Councillor Williams, thank you. We'll just make sure that gets picked up. So, subject to that change, that was moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Williams, I think had a hand up. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to reports by mayors and councillors. Moved by Councillor Lasserf, seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to consideration of reports considered confidential.
I'd like to move a procedural motion that we close the meeting to the public to consider the confidential items listed in the agenda.
So moved, Councillor Lasserf, and seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you to members of the gallery. The meeting has reached the part which is confidential, so we'll now close the meeting to the public.